Thank you to Carolina Public Humanities. We are human beings. We are social beings. We need to connect. We need to belong. We need to know love, feel love, and be love. Connection, belonging, and love are all a part of our collective reality and memory. Our public spaces should serve and promote this spirit. Lived experiences and research has informed us that a person at any age who is isolated and without human contact for a prolonged period of time will suffer physically and mentally. To go without connection is abuse. With this realization, people and communities are intentional in their efforts to be inclusive and to foster engagement in the spirit of humanity. Sadly and strangely, though, there are those who purport to represent and embrace all peoples and yet place their own self-interest first, however myopic or distorted. Or they lift up the interests of those who wish to exclude others. As we define community and home, people are crying out for their voice to be heard, for public spaces of belonging. Regardless of the pleas, protests, and activism by the people, far too many of our representatives and leaders, far too many of our representatives and leaders, the concept of connection is dismissed or overlooked. The idea of belonging is irrelevant. The concern for all is no longer a priority or even an interest. People in power with so-called good intentions are unwilling to sacrifice, to be courageous, to be on the right side of history due to their own self-interest for economic security and positional power. And that is where we are today, here in North Carolina, in Orange County, and in Chapel Hill. Our collective memory is void of the real history of the United States. Those whose ancestors sacrificed and died to keep the dream of freedom and being alive in a racist and violent United States can't ever forget. We seek community. We wish to lessen the pain of having to navigate the daily aggressions that challenge our existence, survival, and attempts to thrive. We seek public spaces that will not remind us of our ancestors' bondage in this foreign land, not remind us of those who tormented and bullied us in their name of their God and white skin. I've become interested in a phenomenon that the authors termed ethnocultural allodynia. In medicine, allodynia refers to exaggerated pain sensitivity in response to a relatively benign stimulus, which results from previous exposures to painful stimuli. Comas-Diaz and Jacobson argue that people of color have an analogous experience, as race-related emotional injuries cause serious changes to one's sense of self, altering how people of color relate to others through an increased sensitivity to loss. Because racism is ever present, it's an organizing theme in the lives of African Americans, as well as other people of color. Just being in the United States as a person of color increases the likelihood of developing ethnocultural allodynia. Relative to whites, African Americans of all socioeconomic levels report more frequent and intense exposure to the stress of racism. Direct and vicarious racism can range from hate crimes to systematic discrimination in the legal, educational, housing, and medical systems. Because of the pervasiveness of racism, many people of color are socialized to be vigilant in ambiguous social situations in order to preserve dignity and self-respect. Racial vigilance increases intuition, fostering the development of a sixth sense for detecting racism. Racism has now been recognized as a major violation of human rights. Ethnocultural allodynia impairs coping because racism often causes confusion, disillusionment, and racial mistrust. Now, despite the presence of this psychological explanation, people of color can clearly identify when they aren't valued or wanted. And despite the trappings of a nice town and nice people here, we feel it today with the matter of Confederate monuments. So what is the default solution to exclusion offered by institutional leaders? It is often inclusion. This inclusion can be another form of terrorism, though. These acts to include people of color are often without sincerity, operate on a short timeline or budget, and fail to examine the at-risk environment in which a person of color is being invited or exposed to. Why do institutions continue to recruit and expose people to environments that are fraught with tension, structural barriers, biases, and symbols of oppression? Because for many institutional leaders, discussing and analyzing race and racism is uncomfortable. Few people in power truly wish to move away from the status quo, gaining more understanding, listen and honor the perspectives of the marginalized, and make informed recommendations. When we do engage, we often see analysis that is stifling. I believe that one of the tentacles of racism is to create binary possibilities, either ors, tradition versus innovation, fear versus abundance, comfort versus growth, heritage versus hate. We limit our creativity in this space. We walk away from diversity in this conversation. We have lots of people talking to people. We don't have enough people talking with people. Our public spaces are for all people. Lifting up those who have sacrificed in the name of social justice should be the easy answer to this ongoing debate. We have many North Carolina social justice and educational champions who have not been acknowledged and celebrated in the public square. John Yanni Chapman, Julius Chambers, or one of the pioneers depicted on the wonderful service mural on display on the first floor of the Nat Sanders building at the School of Government. I state that racism was and is a part of our United States history. Our history is being told each and every day. So the question for our community is, who has the power to tell this history, to act upon it, to evaluate its impact? The one truth that I do believe is everlasting is that if those in power who refuse to act in ways that don't value our need for connectedness, who are stuck in the denial of our history, who feel it's important to listen to the vocal minority who embrace fear, we as the community have the obligation to resist and make change. The significance of monuments in this moment are very, very clear. It's time for us to move forward with love.